9:15 on the morning show with Jeff and Will. We are back on this fine Monday morning, bringing us into our final segment of the morning. But last, never least, as I always do say, or at least most of the time I try to make clear, we do have joining us, as she does every Monday at this time, all the way from the Rockland County Business Journal. It is Tina Traster. Good morning, Tina. How are you this morning?
I am jolly. Good morning to you. How is everybody over there?
We're doing mighty fine on this sunny, average temperature. Well, not average, but like a pretty good temperature morning. I'm falling apart. But other than that, it's A-okay. How are things in the world of Rockland business?
All right, let me help you out there.
Please.
Oh, yeah, I didn't hear you saying anything.
Nope. I'm just, handcuffed now.
I didn't want to interrupt that articulate attempt at defining the weather. So the town of Orangetown has said enough is enough with the HNA property, deciding that it's time to take the first steps to acquire the 100-plus acre parcel on Route 9W through something called eminent domain. This is an interesting development, and we can talk a little bit about eminent domain at the end. But really, the point that I want to talk about today is that if we look around the county, in most of our towns, municipalities, what we're seeing is that there are certain times and circumstances where it makes sense for local government, to step in, acquire property, and then in turn steer its development into the future. So for those who have not been following the HNA story, the HNA former IBM Center has been sitting vacant for about 5 years. The power's off. There's been an oil spill, vandalism, all sorts of deterioration. Not to mention the fact that the HNA owes $4 million in back taxes. And the town a couple of years ago stepped in and tried to help, steer the destiny of the property, and appointed or signed or named, I should say, a developer who has some bold ideas about how to redevelop the site. But for almost 2 years, they've been at the negotiating table, and according to Teresa Kenny, through no fault of the developer's own, it is HNA, which is essentially owned by the Chinese government, that has just failed to negotiate in good faith, and so the parcel hangs in the balance, and now the government is looking at, as I just said, eminent domain, which essentially means that they would take the property. They'd have to appraise it. They'd have to give fair market value. It's a very complicated process. But nevertheless, it is big news that Orangetown has started down that path. Now, we also reported last week that in the village of Haverstraw, the Chair Factory waterfront site, another municipally owned site, 9 acres, is also heading, after a long time being fallow, for mixed-use development. And in fact, just recently, they signed a master development agreement. So here's another example of a municipality, the village of Haverstraw, led by Mayor Michael Kohut, taking control over a vacant, fallow, and very strategic waterfront parcel, and saying, by putting mixed use with affordable housing and commercial components and a hotel, which is slated down there, this could be a real catalyst for major change in the village of Haverstraw. Now, on point, and within the same conversation that we're having, in Stony Point, the town sought a developer for Letchworth Village, which has been sitting idle for 20 years. Same on the Haverstraw side, almost more than 20 years. You've got 2 gigantic parcels that have just been sitting vacant, sitting fallow, falling down, deteriorating. As people out there know, this issue is actually on the ballot tomorrow for Stony Point, a referendum item as to whether or not the voters, the residents, should give permission, just simply give permission for the town to keep negotiating with this particular chosen developer. Nothing unusual here about towns trying to steer development. Stony Point, though, is sort of the outlier, because in all of the other developments that we're talking about, there is no referendum, there is no, residents deciding whether or not this should happen. For example, just across the street on the Haverstraw side, the town has secured a developer for about 22 acres for market rate housing, and was able to do this again, without a referendum.
Do you think I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just had a question. Do you think one strategy is better than the other in reference to having a vote or not? Or do you think they're two completely separate situations?
Well, I think it comes to a certain point where we see that a large fallow piece of property doesn't serve or benefit anybody. It doesn't benefit taxpayers. It doesn't benefit surrounding, retailers. In the case of the Stony Point situation, you've got the publicly owned golf course, but privately leased facility there, which we also recently wrote about, the Patriot Lounge. A business like that, if they were to have an influx of 500 people, is a real boon to keeping business going. And also, if you put that kind of number of people into Stony Point, that benefits all the businesses. Stand to benefit from something like that. The taxpayers benefit from something like this. So, I think that what we're seeing is that, I guess, where there's less interference, and where town boards, I guess, who are elected and people trust to steer the future of their municipalities, when you have these large parcels with the prospect for development, it seems like, barring the ability to turn these parcels into, everybody wants public parks, but that's not always feasible. That's not necessarily good for the tax base. And in many cases, these municipalities already have a lot of open space. So, progress is needed. Housing, we've talked about that a million times, is needed. And I think that all the parcels that we're talking about, they make sense for what is probably the greatest need right now, which is millennial and senior housing. We see, for example, Clarkstown owns the Rockland Country Day School site, and they also bought the Grace Baptist Church. These are two sites that are ripe for development, as is the TOD in Nanuet, the transit-oriented development that Clarkstown continuously tweaks its zoning code for, in order to stimulate, steer, and try to get development going on these parcels. I think that what voters have to understand, what residents have to understand, voters have to understand, is that even when these projects, let's say, move forward, there's still an extensive environmental review. They're reviewed by planning boards, zoning boards, architectural review boards. These projects technically are subject to, scrutiny. And of course, the voice of residents is important. It is important to have in the case of the village of Haverstraw, they've just won an award for their comprehensive plan, which incorporates the former chair factory. It's because they've worked diligently on looking at the plan holistically, that things are finally starting to really take shape. The bottom line is, I would say that stasis, when if we just do nothing, I don't think that's ever a good thing. It has to go one way or the other. Land sitting fallow and being underutilized is just never a good thing, especially when there's an appetite, as there is right now in the commercial world, despite high interest rates and the supplies being interrupted. There is an appetite for building residential units, and we in this county, we don't seem to stop warehouse development. Wherever, a developer wants to put a warehouse, it seems to get green lighted. We need housing. We need millennial and senior housing. We need it desperately. The cost of a studio apartment in the suburbs, is moving north of $2,500 a month. I mean, it's the market is so tight and competitive that young people can't afford to live here. So it's a bigger issue because you want an ecosystem that has a healthy demographic, a good mix of young and old and people in their prime of their careers. And housing is the key to that making that happen. So we have to. So all of these parcels, every single one of these parcels that we're talking about has some housing component. And again, to pull this back to where we started is, it is not unusual for municipal governments to take control of large parcels and help steer them and identify and locate, skilled and experienced developers. And that's what they've done in Stony Point at Letchworth Village. But we will see how that plays out tomorrow night at the polls.
Real quick, considering how the vote went last year and how that was turned down, what are you expecting out of the vote from tomorrow night for Stony Point?
Well, I think that in the last iteration, one could legitimately say that particular developer came to the table without, the true skills, without the track record, without the history, and actually without a specific vision, really, for the site. Plus, that it also involved Raj Amar buying the golf course, and I think that became sticky. This current proposal, I think objectively is a good one. It includes millennial housing. It includes senior and assisted living housing. I think it's a good deal for Stony Point. But whether or not there's kind of the leftover naysaying sentiment is I think what we're going to see tomorrow night. Is we'll see how that plays out. Last year, when the vote went down, it was by a mere 150 votes. It was very slim. It was a very slim margin. If people are paying attention, if they understand the benefits of this development and the tax advantages to them as residents, that's one thing. If they're holding out for some kind of, open space, park, whatever, that seems just as unlikely. So we'll have to see, how educated. It's hard to know how educated residents are going into the polls on this.
And certainly we will find out tomorrow night. Thanks, Tina, so much for joining us. You can check out her site, rcbizjournal.com. Thanks, Tina. We'll talk to you.